Okay, I think I'm gonna start us off officially. This is gonna be a recorded conversation. So if you are joining us now and can't stay for the full hour, it'll be posted within a week. And for those who are yet to join us but can't hear me now, you're listening to me on a recording because you will get the recording soon. And my name is Deborah Sosower. I work here as the Marketing and Communications Manager. I've been here for 2 years, and I'm moderating today's panel. And I'm going to jump in a little bit to introduce myself a bit. But the idea for these discussions is to supplement what we're doing with some of our instructors, which is gathering artists together to have conversations about what it's like to be an artist, working as we work. And for the staff roundtable discussions, we're bringing staff members who are artists to talk about how their role as artists affect how they approach their job at Arrowmont, how their work at Arrowmont is in some ways a creative offering. And so we'll explore some of the different ways in which the behind the scenes thoughts, and in this case, program development and just approach to nonprofit arts administration are impacted by our role and background as artists. So I have three colleagues with me today. I'm very pleased to welcome Rebecca, Nick, and Kelly. They will introduce themselves very shortly. And I will use the chat bar to have their bios and some links to their web pages and social media handles. And for anyone, I'm going to put a link in the chat bar right now. This is the main link for all of our craft conversations. So while we are not able to have everyone in person as we normally would do, we're still keeping our community knitted together through craft conversations and through highlighting the work that everyone in our community, our artists, our instructors, our residents, our students, our staff, our board members are doing. So there are plenty of videos of individual artists' craft conversations and of these roundtable discussions. So that will be where you can see what's upcoming and see links to videos. And we also have them all on our YouTube channel. So if you have questions today, I'll ask that you use the Q&A. That is the button down on the bottom of your screen on the left-hand side. And so we have some questions that we'll go through, and we'll get to as many audience questions as possible. But we will probably wrap up right around 1 to respect everybody's time. And we encourage you to reach out to us with other questions and let us know how you're doing. It's important to us that we all get through this together. So with that, Rebecca, please tell us about yourself and your art.
Yeah, well, hi everyone. It's nice to see some familiar names over on this sidebar. But my name is Rebecca Buglio. I'm the program and studio manager here at Arrowmont. I started working here summer of 2016. I moved down here after getting my master's in ceramics, so my background is in clay. I also have a degree in art education. So for me, being able to work at Arrowmont is really awesome, and the fact that I get to use the education side of things for helping to program classes and be involved with classes, but also use my ceramic side in helping all of our clay classes go smoothly. So yeah, that's I don't know what else we want to know about me right now.
Everything?
Everything.
All of the above, yeah.
Yeah, well, I'll stop there and then we can go in more for questions and stuff.
I'm Nick DeFord. I'm the program director here at Arrowmont. My story with Arrowmont actually begins quite a long time ago. I was first came to take my first class in 2002 and was a work study, was a studio assistant, taught in the community classes for several years, but then came back to teach in 2011 and 2012. And it was in 2012 that I joined the staff as the program and studio manager, what Rebecca's doing now. And then in 2015, I became the program director. I've been the program director now for, I guess, 5 years. The program director is in charge of what I simply say is that when things are happening on campus in our studios, like me and my team of wonderful people help make those things happen. So it's mostly, people know it's mostly for our national workshops, but it's also community classes, it's conferences, it's exhibitions that we have both on and on campus, our residency, our work study program. The programming and studio and gallery team all helped make sure that those things run smoothly. So I'm excited to talk a little bit more about what we do here at Arrowmont, and also for those out there listening, people who might be interested in working as an arts administrator or working in nonprofit, what it's like, and how we all got here. So I think I'll pass it over to Kelly to introduce herself.
Great. Yeah, so I'm Kelly, and I'm the Youth Education Program Manager here at Arrowmont. I'm originally from Rochester, New York, but I moved to Knoxville 12 years ago for graduate school. I have an MFA from the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, graduated in 2011. So in my job here, I work really closely with Rebecca. We plan and implement all of the community programming here, which typically happens in January and February. And I also work on our youth outreach program, which is called Outreach, and it has a long history here in Sevier County, where students from the surrounding county come to Arrowmont to do a one-day craft workshop, sort of like a field trip. But we recently expanded the program, and it is reaching students in schools in 5 other Central Appalachian states. So Western North Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Southeast Ohio. So that's really exciting, and I've been working on getting that program off the ground. I have a studio practice still and exhibit my work on top of having a full-time job and being a mom. I have a 5-year-old. And my background originally is in painting and drawing, but I'm very much a mixed media artist now and use old family photographs as source material, do some Photoshop manipulations of those, and then print them larger scale and do surface embellishments, usually with glitter or something else sparkly. So it's a little bit more about my studio practice. I've been in this position for a little over a year, but previously I was the gallery manager here for almost 3 years. So I've been in 2 staff positions.
And then I'm Deborah Sosower. So my background is in printmaking. I'm from North Carolina. I went to college at Bryn Mawr in Philadelphia. I was I was one of 10 fine art majors between Bryn Mawr and Haverford, which is a bi-college consortium, and I was the only printmaking major. And that's largely due to the fact that the printmaking studio offered the only afternoon intro classes when I was a freshman. So I was not a morning person at that time. So that was very influential, apparently. And then I ended up living in Philly for a couple of years and moved to Brooklyn and got my degree in printmaking as a master's student at Pratt. And then I lived in Atlanta for about 8 years before getting the job at Arrowmont here 2 years ago. And so I knew from apparently 2nd grade not only was I going to be an artist, but I was an artist. That's a family story. I knew as a senior in college that I wanted to be an art professor. And then when I started pursuing that career after graduating in 2009, when the recession hit, that was a challenge, but I persevered. And in so doing, when I moved to Atlanta, knowing that there were a lot of universities and colleges and a lot of art programming, I got really involved with my community printmaking studio, the Atlanta Printmaker Studio. I got really involved with a nonprofit called C4 Atlanta, which taught and does still teach entrepreneurial skills to artists, business planning, lean marketing strategies, fundraising, website development. They're doing really amazing programs. And I started teaching at Kennesaw State University part-time and had wonderful mentorship. And being involved, there's an international nonprofit dedicated to printmaking called SGC International. So I was involved with those conferences and with that board for a long time. So I thought I knew it all. And then I got a job here at Arrowmont and realized how little I really know and how much more there is to go on this journey. So I kind of had a real switch in what I thought my career would be in 2018 which is also the year that every other major expensive life change happened to me. So I got married and moved out of state, and I caught my 20-year-old car died, and all these things. So yeah, so that's a little bit more about me and my own. Let me just say, my own artwork is large scale. It tends to be large scale woodblock relief prints that look like abstract expressionism. So what I like to do is create in like a weekend a very expressive, painterly, splattery image that uses my own body as a ready-made. And then I usually spend 1 to 3 months carving that out on 4 by 8 foot blocks. What I've been doing since I've moved here, and I don't actually have a super large studio space to work in, I've been taking a lot of my old prints, because as an artist and as printmaker, I never throw anything away in the studio. And I've been starting to like assemble those together. So I would cut things out and then reassemble them. That's what I've been doing with my art in the studio, which hasn't amounted to like much productive artwork. I've really found that my creative energy has been spent here at Arrowmont. So with that, let me ask you guys what it's like for each of you. Like, how do you feel like your art making process, your role as an artist, your identity as an artist, how does that impact you as an arts administrator?
I think for me, the crossover is a lot of patience. With clay, you know, there's a lot of waiting around for things to dry and between kiln firings. And I guess, you know, in this admin role, you know, I work with making sure all of our studios on campus are set up week to week. And there's a lot of prep of material ordering and material gathering and working with different departments. And so there's a little bit of wait time between when things can actually get done and when things need to be done, or kind of that order that it goes in. And so I think, you know, patience is both present in my art practice, but also in work. I also oversee our work study program, so making sure coordinating when people are going to arrive, when they're going to not be here, when, you know, housing is going to be available, and being able to work with all those different facets of people coming and going on a week-to-week basis, or even just, you know, months in advance of, you know, before anyone even gets here. I think for me, learning patience through clay has been very important in the job role side of things.
And Rebecca, I want to quickly jump in and ask you too. There was a question about what your work kind of looks like, and you actually you focus your work on organic processes that themselves are very slow moving and slow growing too. Can you just tell us a little bit more?
Yeah. So my art practice itself, I do a combination of throwing and hand building. So I'll throw most of my forms to begin with on the wheel. And then once I get that kind of basic shape of either a bowl or a pitcher or cup, cylinders, I'll hand build organic shapes, as you said. Most prevalent, I think, in all of my work currently, and at least in the last couple of years, has been fungi. I think they're kind of the underdogs in nature. Most people forget about them, but on all of the hikes and all of the walks going out in the backyard, they're this thing that people are either like, oh, like that's gross, it's fungus, it's, you know, it's there, it's something that people overlook, but they're actually really, really important to the environment, like actually moving and doing things. You know, so there's this weird side of just like mycelium growing underground and that being like way bigger than anything else in the world right now, if you were to like take it all out. But I think there's also this weird, interesting crossover for me in using that most people don't see fungi as, they see it as plants, but they're actually parasites. They need a host to live off of. And so I like correlating that to us as people, because we need sustenance from other things. We can't just photosynthesize like a plant. And so for me, using it in my artwork, it's a way to kind of show that slow moving time of like, there's always something that comes after, in my mind, whether it be the changing of memory or the changing of just an instance that we go through. As you know, one day you could be happy, the next day you could be sad, and what happened in between those to make you feel that way. So using fungi as this thing that oftentimes can be forgotten, but it's always somehow there, if you let it be, and it kind of evolves and grows into new ways, is really interesting to me. And I guess too, like all this sciencey background, I could have added in my intro, like I didn't start off wanting to be an artist. I was actually supposed to be on track to be a veterinarian. So I've taken a lot of science classes in my early education years. And so I think that's also something that's stuck with me throughout all of this, of just, you know, scientific processes and organization and charts, and all of that has a role in my studio practice as well as the job role. So yeah, I did that answer the original question? I feel like I went around.
No, that was perfect. Kelly, what do you guys think?
You know, to answer your question, Deborah, sort of along the lines of that Rebecca did about patience, I think that in my studio practice, I am very detail oriented. It's very sort of detail and compartmentalized, and almost like, I don't know, to an obnoxious degree. I think that I could benefit from loosening up a little bit in the studio. But I think that I translate that to my job. Absolutely. Just being super organized and super detail oriented and super thorough. Again, I think in my position to maybe too far of a degree sometimes. But that is true in both my studio practice and my role here.
And I saw Debbie's question as well. And I realized I never talked at all in my introduction about my artwork, but I'm a fiber artist. I do predominantly embroidery on paper objects. And for those who are listening, who are also fiber artists or aware of it, I think one of the things that defines fiber arts, whether it's weaving or embroidery or knitting, is that it's a lot of small actions that make up a whole, and you don't see the whole until the very end, right? Like it's hidden. It's the actions themselves are kind of cumulative, and I think that's something that happens here at Arrowmont a lot. You know, it's the students that come to experience a class, whether it's community class or it's a national workshop or it's a conference. You know, there's a lot of planning in multiple departments here at Arrowmont that go into making those events try to be as successful as they can be. And it's a similar thing where maybe those small steps, those small processes aren't inherently, you don't see the final product until the very end. But when you do, that's the most rewarding part, right? And when you have that scarf completed, or for me, when I finish an embroidery and all those hours of stitching has culminated into the final piece, that's when I get the most pleasure. My studio work isn't necessarily the most exciting studio work, to do, but the work that goes into it, the results are exciting. And I think that's true for Arrowmont. That's one of the things, as we mentioned, like not having classes right now, I think the staff kind of misses that. We miss the energy that happens when the students are here, because that's when everything comes together and sort of the tapestry is complete. I think that's probably a pretty good crossover to my studio practice.
Definitely. Yeah. So I know that when I came to Arrowmont, I actually did mostly programming in the other nonprofits that I was doing. I did conference planning, registration, coordination, program development, instruction, and of course teaching. I've found that there's been a crossover between being interested in pedagogy and teaching outcomes as a professor at a university, and then trying to apply that to in a new lens. In my case, it's marketing, communications, and PR. So I have to think about like what is the goal of what my writing is? Like who am I appealing to? What do I want them to do? You know, what is different for someone when I'm trying to say, I want you to, I need you to sign up for this workshop versus, we want you to attend this conference versus we need you to donate and support Arrowmont and our mission and our staff and our work. There's a question too. Have any of you guys worked in nonprofits prior to coming to Arrowmont? And I'm going to add to that, like, what has your previous experience as students of art or as professors of art or as nonprofits or other work, how has that brought you to where you are today with your work here?
I saw that question that came in from one of the attendees, and I wanted to speak to it. So in between my time as the gallery manager here at Arrowmont and then returning to this new role, I took a job in Knoxville, another nonprofit, the Tennessee Theater Foundation, that takes care of a 90-year-old historic theater in Knoxville. And I worked in development, which was super different. And so, that was a department that I wasn't familiar with. And I managed like the membership program and organized community events and did fundraising and donor cultivation. And that was such valuable experience because I learned about more about how a nonprofit works, right? And where the money comes from and like what, I feel like it filled in my understanding of nonprofit, like wholly understanding what a nonprofit is and how it operates. And so I'm glad to be back in my role and I enjoy programming, but that was really interesting. That was really valuable experience. And then secondly, Deborah, you asked about like experiences you had before working in nonprofit. And I was going to say like like many artists, I thought I was going to be a college professor and, while I was I was an adjunct for like 3.5 years before joining the staff full time here. And while I was an adjunct, so I was an adjunct and I was working at community colleges. But while I was doing that, I took every opportunity to do other types of art contract gigs or volunteer work or positions. And those ended up lending themselves to my new job, my roles here and like the turn that my career took. I did things like I taught summer camp classes at the local museum to kids, and I worked in this after school program with the public defender's office for at-risk youth that lived in the area and taught in this after school program. And I worked at a couple of nonprofits in Knoxville, one doing like contract gallery planning and work, and then I volunteered at the Arts and Culture Alliance doing admin stuff for it was like 3 or 4 months I did that when one of their staff members was on maternity leave. And so I would just like take any opportunity I could, and it both built my resume but gave me all these different experiences that then ended up lending themselves really well to these jobs that I had no idea would be in my future. So my advice to any young, artist coming out of school or in that position to take those opportunities, because you never know where you're going to land and what's going to end up helping you get there.
Yeah, I mean, I can jump off of that too, of just saying, if there's something that comes along and it's remotely interesting and you have the opportunity to do it, go for it. As I mentioned, I didn't think I was going to grow up and be in the arts, but I just happened to take, a clay class as an elective in college, and that kind of changed the whole trajectory of where I am. But I wound up staying at the small school that I was at, Berry College. It was very much a science school, and so their art building was very small, I think there was 3 staff members. There was like the art historian, the ceramics professor, and the 2D professor, and like that was it. So my pretty much college degree was being taught by those 3 people, but since they weren't a big art program, I really got the chance to help in the gallery show exhibitions. I got to see what, scheduling receptions was like. I got to help load kilns, fire kilns, make glazes. I got to help in the photography studio and the 2D studio because, there wasn't that many full art degree majors going through the program. And so between the small group of us, there was enough to like have our hands in all the different media. And so that was really helpful, I think, in setting me up to want to go to grad school and ask bigger questions that the little college I was at didn't have the answers for. But then even going to grad school, you know, I joined our GSA, which was the kind of student government body, and making sure like, okay, how can I be more involved in different events around campus or different, you know, things that were going on between departments, and, you know, setting up open studios between different graduate levels and things like that. And those were things that I had nothing to do with ceramics at the time, but it was something I was interested in. And I would ask my professors constantly, being like, hey, you know, I'm just really curious about this. How do I get more involved with that? Or, you know, what is the process to you know, make sure this thing is certified and going through? And, you know, for me, having, I think, you know, as of 2000, what would have been 2011-ish, when 2011, when I like finally got a foot into the art world of being like, what is this thing? Before that, I was always thinking science. So I just kind of like a sponge tried to absorb everything, even if it didn't necessarily have anything to do with ceramics. I just was curious and asked questions. I would always invite people that were not ceramic people to the studio to be like, hey, what's your take on this? And how does this work? And how did you get to be here? What is your job? How do you do that? And so I think, you know, like Kelly said, just asking, never asked, like there can never be too many questions. When you run into someone that's doing something remotely interesting, like just pick their brain and pull it apart and see like what they have to offer as far as that. And then on the education side, I feel like, you know, I've always worked with kids, even in, you know, growing up having, you know, babysitting jobs, nanny jobs, working as like a pool instructor, all those things. I've always gravitated to teaching, and little kids have such a great imagination, and I wish that we didn't lose that at some point in school, in the system. But I think that was another area of just, you know, what led me to look more into nonprofit work after graduation, or at least, you know, in ever having a job at Arrowmont, was just the fact that I realized that the arts aren't as valued in our education system as it is set up now. And I think that the craft schools and nonprofit art community organizations do have such a big role in playing with those young minds and kids in different communities. And so that was also another area where I just asked a lot of questions to different, you know, educators that had been part of where I got to in my career, of like, how did they go through school? What, you know, certifications did they acquire, and all that stuff. And so I think between the art side and the education side, I just was always asking questions and picking people's brains, or emailing people, or asking them like, you know, how do I get to the next step, or what is the next step? And so that's, I think, the biggest piece of advice I can give to anyone thinking about going through higher education, or where they're curious about being. Just always ask a lot of questions.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I didn't work at a nonprofit before working at Arrowmont. I was a college lecturer, so I taught at a university for 3 years before I came here. But I would say that, like I mentioned at the very beginning, I had been a community class instructor here at Arrowmont. I had been a work study. I had been a student. I had been a studio assistant, and I'd also been an instructor. So I was able to go into the position of program and studio manager with a knowledge base of the people that I would interact with and help, or maybe even manage or oversee or assist as a program and studio manager. I had been that person once too. So I could empathize, and I could help by knowing that other side. And so I know there's a couple of questions, and sort of pull them all together, people kind of asking, well, how do you get into how do you get into nonprofit arts administration, or if you don't have that experience? My advice is, if there's a particular place that you love, find a way to be involved with the place before you even start working there as a full-time employee. Most nonprofits have lots of volunteer opportunities. They have other opportunities to just help or just go to and partake in their programming. Because it is really different, on the other side, but at least you understand what it's like to be a participant, which will help make the other side easier. It's sort of like going to the theater or going to the movies. Like, going to watch a movie at a theater is a lot different than being behind the scenes and running the projector. You don't ever see the projector, and you don't ever see ordering the films and all the things that goes into that side. You just get to see the movie. But seeing the movie is an important part. Like, a person who runs a theater or a movie theater needs to know what it's like to watch a movie, to be able to properly run that establishment. So I would say, my advice is, even if you don't have nonprofit experience right now, but you're interested in it, start by just being an active participant in with the place that you're interested in.
And I'll also add to that, for me, I had always wanted to be part of Arrowmont. I think I'm like the black sheep of a lot of the staff here, but to add to Nick, like, be involved with wherever you want to end up, but don't get discouraged when you get rejections. If, like, you try for scholarships or you try for a class and you wind up seeing that it's full, or a residency program. Like, I think I applied for everything that Arrowmont had to offer when I was curious about, okay, I want to be at Arrowmont, but I got so many like, oh no, this is full, or oh no, you didn't get a scholarship, no work study, no residency. And I never stopped. I always knew, like, I want to be involved somehow in this circuit. And so don't be discouraged when you get those no's. It's kind of like gallery shows, where even if you get a rejection, don't be afraid to reapply or put your foot in another door, or still reach out, because it does go a long way. I think on our end of, when people reapply for things, we see that they're still interested and they're, going through. And so I think that's my little tack on advice too, is even if you get a no the first couple rounds, still keep trying if it's something that you want to be part of.
Yeah, that's so true. I know the nonprofits that I had been involved with before Arrowmont, I volunteered. I was the recipient of their programming in some way. And so I volunteered to be a part of it, and then just kind of slowly, I have a philosophy of yes. You know what I mean? Like, I did this when I was teaching too. If someone would say, oh, do you know how to do this? Or can you teach that? I would always say, yes, I can. And then I would learn how to do it if I didn't already, So I think, I can say from my own personal experience, I have had a goal for years. It hasn't happened since I've been working here, because Arrowmont it's more than full time for me in terms of like creative output. But before then, I had a goal of I had to apply to one thing a month, whether it was a residency, a scholarship, an exhibition. Just I had a $35 budget, monthly budget, and that $35 would go to one application fee a month. And then 10 out of 12 months, I was rejected, but two times out of 10 or out of 12, I would, on average, get in a show, get in a fellowship, get into a space. So there's an interesting question that I have thought a lot about, and that we're thinking about too, about what is the role or the preference for being an artist and getting hired at an organization like Arrowmont or another artist nonprofit? And is that to be preferred to someone who is passionate about the arts, but who they themselves may not consider themselves to be an artist? And I actually want to answer this myself, and that is, I find that my creative background helps me at Arrowmont. I have a skill set that helps in marketing because I've done graphic design. And so the the ins and outs of the Adobe suite I'm pretty comfortable with. But it's actually been in some ways a hindrance to me because I'm a visual artist, and I think about and I'm comfortable in the area of creative design, but my role is really to be a writer and to be a documenter and to be a manager. And so in my department, which includes fundraising, outreach, grant writing, fundraising events, marketing communications, and public relations, having artists. Well, let me rephrase it this way. Everyone in my department is an artist, but we have to want to be art administrators more than artists to succeed in our department here at Arrowmont. And I think we see a lot of people apply to Arrowmont because they love being a student at Arrowmont, and they think that working at Arrowmont is just like coming here for a week and taking an art class and having an amazing time. And that it is amazing. It is so rich and rewarding, but it is not at all like coming and taking a class and getting 3 meals a day and getting your back rubbed by your roommate, which is, maybe that's weird, but my roommate was my wife. So you know what I mean? Like working here is very, very different. I think as a printmaker, I'm used to seeing, going through things the hard way and everything, everything's in reverse until you get to your final piece and all this other kind of stuff. So like the process orientation, methodology, the attention to detail, like Kelly was talking about, the patience, like Rebecca was talking about, all of those things apply to work as a manager, as an administrator. But actually wanting to make art as a day-to-day thing and being recognized as an artist in your own right, this is a really great opportunity right now that we have to talk together about it. But it's the barest little, it's not a huge part of what the day-to-day work is like working at an arts nonprofit. But what do you guys think about it?
Yeah, I would say that also, because the question was like, is there preference given to people who are artists to take on these, these roles? And I would say not necessarily, because first of all, even how does somebody define themselves as an artist is a really different thing to talk about. Are you an artist with if you exhibit so many times a year? Are you an artist if you make money off your art? Are you an artist if you do it for yourself and nobody ever knows that you do it? So there are lots of, we have about 25 to 30 staff members here at Arrowmont. I think all of the staff members have done some art, right? If they've taken community classes. Some people do exhibit locally, nationally, a couple times a year. Other people don't. And I would also say that, so no, is the answer. The short answer to that is, the short answer is no. I don't think necessarily that you have to be a visual artist to work at a visual arts nonprofit, for example. And there's lots of other stakeholders in the field of arts besides just the creator, right? There's collectors, there's appreciators, there's writers who write about art. And so I think that the whole, to go back to maybe use a metaphor from Rebecca's talking about funguses, the whole organism of what arts is, in arts, even in arts administration, is way beyond just one component, one organ, which is the artist who makes things. We need the whole ecosystem of different people to invest in the community of arts. So I would say, yeah, you don't have to be an artist to work at an arts nonprofit, but I think you have to have obviously some sort of interest in what the content of that nonprofit is, and whether that means you're a long-term collector or you go to a lot of art museums, you appreciate it. Maybe you always wanted to write about arts. I think that to be involved in that community is really important, no matter what you do on staff. But not necessarily, I don't think to be a practicing artist is necessarily a really critical thing. So.
Yeah, I agree with Nick and 100%, but then also just wanted to tack on that, to your point, Deb, that people apply here because they're like, oh yeah, Arrowmont, like I had this great experience in a class, but arts administration is primarily on the computer. I think all of us could say that the majority of our job is spent sitting in front of a computer screen. And I think, and not everything, I mean, I prep materials, for classes as well, in my program. And I enjoy those moments when I can get away from the computer, but I think that knowing that going into it is is beneficial. Yeah, it's not teaching. It's not a studio practice. It is administration. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think kind of tying both of those things, a lot of our staff don't necessarily like being in the spotlight. I feel like we're all happy being behind the curtain, so to speak. While we all might be artists in our own ways, I think for us, there's that, satisfaction of when other students are making and we can observe. I think that's kind of our unifying thing across the board, where we just like seeing other people make, but knowing that we know we can make too, if we ever needed to. But that satisfaction of knowing that we're helping other people get to that making process. And I think, this idea of people coming to the nonprofit art realm who might not necessarily consider themselves artists or might not have their foot as heavy in the art world. I think there still is a place, because we do have some staff where, they are art collectors or they're art appreciators. But I think those are the conversations that I also enjoy the most, because they have such a different perspective than having gone through the education system on the art side. And so they offer something new for us to think about. So I think it is, like Nick said, it's important to have both of those in the organization working, and that everyone that's hired isn't full on like art minded, I guess, art background as heavy, that there's a good healthy mixture that's needed, because there's different conversations that happen. And I think I see that too in our student body as well. Like, we get so many people that they're like, I just saw this in an advertisement and I thought I'd try it. And usually they make the greatest things in those workshops, because they don't have any like reference point to go to. They're just like, I just wanted to make this and it turned out wonderful. And so those are usually like some of the better conversations that you can have between two people that may not have otherwise been here. So I think a good healthy mix is needed.
Well, and I was going to say, we're Arrowmont's benefited by our community. We're in Appalachia. There are staff members who are like second or third generation weavers in their family. So art wasn't a career path that they opted to do in school. They grew up with crafts and art being made in their homes and by their families all around them. And so, I think, Nick, your point about like identifying as an artist or a non-artist, like, I think that's one of the things at Arrowmont as a culture, we try to take down those barriers. Like, making art or doing craft is enough. It's enough to want to do it. And you don't have to put a label on yourself, and you don't have to be great at it, and you don't have to make money at it. Although if you are and you do, that's also to be celebrated.
Deborah, can I use that as a segue? There was a really good question of working in Arrowmont. What is one of our biggest challenges in the past, and then what's a current biggest challenge? I'll go ahead and say right now, our current biggest challenge is COVID-19. But I want to go back.
Never heard of it.
I know, right? I want to go back to a challenge that you just talked about, which I think a challenge that for me as a program director, I think a lot about to try to overcome, is that idea that people have about what the term artist means, and sometimes it intimidates yourself. And I think there's another question about having a slump in the studio. It all ties into it to one another. I think I was fortunate enough to go through sort of a college program in art. So I knew what art classes were like. It was a familiar environment. I knew what it was like to put myself in a vulnerable situation of making art in front and with other people. Not everybody has that experience. So I think sometimes, as Rebecca brought up, we have people who want to come to take art classes, but there's a certain fear of putting yourself into, and this is again pre-pandemic fear, right? There's a different kind of vulnerability now, but putting yourself in a situation where you're making something with and in front of other people, and what if you fail? What if your piece that you make doesn't turn out the way that you want? People who say, I don't consider myself an artist, so Arrowmont isn't a place for me. And I think the challenge for me is to try to reach those people and say, Arrowmont is exactly the place for you. You know, this is a place where you can come and make and learn to make when you're not an artist specifically. Now, there will be other people in your class who may be professional artists, but that's not necessarily something I hope that people feel too intimidated by, because the spirit is that they're there to, as we've already been talking about, learn as much from you and your perspective as you hopefully will from them. So sometimes I think one of the biggest challenges we have to overcome is that barrier of personal fear to put themselves into a situation where they're making things, which I think relates to this idea of calling yourself, how do you define yourself as artist or not? So
I think one of my job is to share what Nick and Rebecca and Kelly do at Arrowmont, the programs that they administer, and make it disseminated into the world. And so one of the biggest challenges that I have had, and so the question is phrased like, what do we consider the largest challenge that Arrowmont has had in previous years? And then what is the largest challenge now? So Arrowmont has had many challenges. There was a question of whether the founding entity that administered Arrowmont, that ran Arrowmont, did a property sale about 8 years ago, and so there was a question as to whether Arrowmont would stay here in this historic campus. So that was kind of a huge challenge, but it was overcome, and that was actually an amazing public-private partnership of individual donors, a major foundation, the city of Gatlinburg itself, the community of Sevier County. They all helped Arrowmont purchase the deed and the land. And then a couple of years ago, there were wildfires, and Arrowmont lost buildings for that. So that was, of course, a huge challenge. I think in terms of, and then now we're facing a novel global pandemic, of reckoning with racial injustice, and economic downturn, and artists and people who love making art and teachers are hugely affected, and those are the people in our community. So my challenge has always been like, how do Arrowmont, for its flaws and the things that we'll always work on. I mean, I can say that I, as a dedicated staff member, and I've had these conversations with all these people that you see on the screen, we try every day to make Arrowmont a better, a safer place, because Arrowmont, we want it to be welcoming. And that was a challenge to say before, how do I share the message of Arrowmont? How do I let people know that Arrowmont even exists in communities of color, in LGBTQ communities, in youth communities, right? We have a lot of people, I would say most people who come to Arrowmont, the average age is in the 50s and 60s. And these are people who have the means and the time, or the job that gives them like time off in the summer, say, or in the early fall, to be able to take a week and come and spend it at Arrowmont. And so my role has been to invite people to know about Arrowmont and hope that they will come join us at Arrowmont in other communities. And so after this, I think that job is more important than ever. I think we have to examine the systemic issues that Arrowmont is a part of to make this the preeminent craft school that everybody knows about, that people all over the country and the world want to be at. So it's a tall order. That's, I think, the biggest challenge is going to be, how do we make it safe? How do we make it physically safe? Rebecca, Kelly, Nick, like they've been coming up with like policies and procedures and sneeze guards and signage and all these things, so we can actually physically have people back, because we're going to have classes. We're going to have classes, and so how do we do that safely? That's the biggest challenge, I think.
Yeah, I think in my mind, it always comes down to upgrades. Thinking like our past challenges and our current challenges all have to do with how do we stay current? How do we correct things that have been going wrong, whether it's, equipment that's 20 years old and we need to, get something new that everyone's been using or that works better or that is safer to use. And, in light of COVID, making sure that, everything's spaced and all of the equipment that we have is the correct amount and that it's still going to be user friendly. And, I think there's all of these different facets of the studio side of what my job is here, of making sure all of our studios have the necessary equipment for both the beginner, but also the advanced level student, making sure that, everyone's staying safe, that they're keeping all their fingers. I think, one of the things that we always said at orientation was, making sure that we don't have to call 911 during the national workshop weeks. And so I think that's a big part of my job, is just how do we upgrade? How do we keep our programs and keep our studios going to stay with whatever the current practices, the current climate, the current media that is kind of hot and upcoming, whether it be, people wanting to go into different paper making techniques or bookbinding or metalworking or blacksmithing. All of those require different areas, but we only have our 10 spaces. And so making sure that as Nick programs things, that we can go ahead and upgrade and keep current with what people can go back out into their home studios or back to their schools, to their universities or their community centers, and being able to take what they learned here and it still apply elsewhere. So for me, the word of that topic is just upgrade. Like, how do we keep upgrading so that we don't fall behind?
We still have a couple of really interesting questions. I kind of, again, dealing with what's going to happen next. Like, what is our future during COVID or post-COVID? How are we going to, what are the practical policy changes we make? How are we actually going to physically deal with new policies that we're doing in the studios to keep people safe? Kelly, can you talk a little bit about the virtual outreach on the road? I think that might help. That might be something that addresses some of these.
Yeah, I was thinking about this COVID-19 challenge, and all of my youth programs were going to be canceled, until further notice, and quickly pivoted the program to a virtual format. And so I'm working with 5 artists right now to create instructional videos that they'll be able to access through our YouTube channel, and then putting together these art kits that will be dropped off at the schools. So the teacher can show the video in the classroom, and then all the students will have their own art kits. Or if schools go remotely, then these kits can be used at home by the student, and they can tap into the YouTube channel and do it on their own. Currently, I'm going to be providing this program to all the schools in Sevier County that we were supposed to work with this fall, as well as there was supposed to be an outreach on the road in Campbell County, Tennessee. And so we're putting together 1,400 of these art kits, which I'm so excited about. They'll be dropped off at the end of October. And that's been really creative and interesting for me, just to figure out how that's going to work. And one thing I'm super excited about that program, typically when the students participate in Outreach, they make something, but they have to leave the equipment and the materials. But in this instance, they get to keep everything that's in the kit. So they get to keep their embroidery hoop, or they get to keep their little weaving loom. And I'm hoping that will sustain maybe a studio practice for them, or at the very least give them something to do, while they're at home and social distancing this winter, right? And so I'm really excited about that. I think that's a really, that's a silver lining to this pivot.
And Rebecca, we talked just yesterday about some of the things that you're implementing for our upcoming community classes that we're hoping to have.
Yeah, with all of the workshops getting canceled this year, unfortunately, it's been a big kind of thing that keeps me up at night on how do we get students safely back into our studios. So I've been working really closely with our studio techs, Heather, Michael, and Sam, to make sure that we're spacing equipment, taking, multiples of equipment out that won't be needed based on, the size of classes that we're going to be capping things at. On a typical day, we have, anywhere between 15 or 18 people in each studio, and that's just not something that realistically we'll be able to do going forward for a little bit, at least, until, things are hopefully better. But, accounting for, okay, what does a studio look like that might have smaller numbers? And, if everyone gets a toolkit, or does everyone have, the correct amount of space that they can be, working in. So making sure that we're measuring, that we're updating our cleaning procedures. So, looking into new cleaning products, so that while we're in between classes, what we traditionally call the changeover time between our national workshops, making sure that we're going to be able to clean successfully and make sure that we're keeping our students as safe as possible. But then while students are actually here, having, stations set up where they can, wipe things down that they need to get wiped down, that they have their own table, their own toolkits if they need be, that they know ahead of time anything that, might be shared, because we don't have enough to go around, that if they have it, like, everyone will get like cutting mats or rulers, or if you have your own set of those things and you're more comfortable using those things, being able to communicate that with students ahead of time. So really working with our front office to get all that information together, and, making sure that communication is going to be on point, hopefully, with making sure the students coming have all the information they need, but that we're fully set up and ready to kind of tackle anything that might get thrown at us. As far as tool sharing might go, or toolkits, or equipment, or heavy machinery, and making sure that's all spaced out and keeping people safe and healthy.
So I'm going to ask you guys each to share one last thing, and then in the chat bar, I'm going to have next couple of roundtable discussions. We're going to have our next instructor roundtable discussion in September, in 2 weeks. And that's going to focus on a discussion about sustainability. So artists and craftspeople who sustainability is a major concept in their work. And then in October, we're going to have a staff roundtable with about kind of collections, art collections, and the different ways that Arrowmont and nonprofits and nonprofits have gallery spaces, or exhibition spaces, or sales spaces, or education collections, how that gets addressed. And then we're going to have art outside, so craftspeople and artists who make their work outside, instructor roundtable in October as well. So I'll have those dates, so you guys can be putting that on your calendar. But my last question to all of you guys is, in light of COVID, in light of the idea of how do you keep making art yourself, even though your work here at Arrowmont is a lot, can you share what's going to happen next in your art studio?
I'm not really sure. It's interesting. I don't know if I believe in creative slumps or not. Like, there are times when you grow tired of maybe a current body of work that you're working on, or sometimes you just don't feel like working in the studio. I feel like a lot of times people start to feel that, again, guilt or some other emotion that comes with that. But, this goes back to being an artist, and making art doesn't mean you have to literally make art all the time. That sometimes being an artist, I think about it like tides. Like, sometimes you're putting stuff out into the world, but sometimes you're taking stuff in. And so I would say that right now I've been watching a lot of catching up on movies. I've been reading a lot, which is good. I've been making art in my studio, and still making, but I've actually just been finishing up projects that I've had started and left. So that, in a way, it might not be the most novel and new body of work that I'm doing, but that doesn't mean that it's not productive for me, and it doesn't mean it won't lead to something later. So I think that for me, giving myself the time, because that's one of the things right now that if you're social distancing, or you're quarantining, or maybe you're sort of thinking about what can I do in the studio, take some time to read or catch up on things that maybe you haven't done before. You know, that's what I've been doing.
And I was going to say, so not really related to the pandemic, but just in general, like keeping my studio practice going, you know, with a full-time, a demanding arts administration position. And again, like being a parent, I often feel like my job starts at 6 o'clock in the morning and doesn't end until my daughter doesn't go to sleep early. And so it ends around 9 o'clock at night usually. And I rent a studio space in Knoxville, and I love having a space outside of my home. That's my ideal situation. But in order to keep my studio practice going, I've had to make a little studio at home. And so I continue to have my rented space that I go to sometimes, and my studio practice is pretty contained. So I just need like a table and like a shelf next to it, and I have everything I need. But it's been really helpful to continue my practice with these life circumstances, having a table that I can just like walk across the hallway to after I put her to bed, and then I can start making, and I have an hour and I don't have to drive anywhere. So that's been really helpful for me.
Yeah, I think for on my end, I also have a home studio practice. I've converted my second bedroom into my studio, and you know, it's got plastic everywhere for clay because I have carpet in the apartment. But I think for me, with the shutdown that Arrowmont went through and earlier this year, and you know, I had to help my family with a little bit of that. For me, the studio practice over the last couple of years since starting work at Arrowmont has drastically gone down. But I think, like Nick mentioned, there is different ways to make art. And for me, observing and watching other people function in our studios has been a lot more rewarding than me just making something at home. And so for me, that was enough to still sustain or feel like I was making enough on my free time. So whether that be sketching, like I've been trying to you know, make sure I keep my sketch journal, or whenever we'd have instructors come through or students come through, I would jot notes down that of just little inspirations that they've mentioned to me either at lunch times or different areas, and I would keep those things or those thoughts. And then during times, typically in the winter at Arrowmont, when it's a little slower and I can actually get into the studio a little bit more, I would revisit all of those notes or those sketches. But the fact that I wasn't actually making during like our national workshop season didn't bother me, because I felt like I was getting enough from just watching other people make, and you know, that was enough for me. I think without there being people on campus right now, I've had to kind of get those sources elsewhere. So I've done a lot more. Like, I think I've followed way more people on Instagram than I normally would, just because I'm looking for that kind of give and take of like, oh, what's everyone else up to? What new processes am I missing? Like, what are other people up to in this time? And I will fully admit I always loved nature, obviously, based on my artwork, but I have become a lot more of a plant mom over the last couple months. So I do see a lot of my current work that I've been making actually revolving around planters, because I just need them in my apartment. So that's a way that I've definitely seen my work changing, is more kind of moving towards how to feed a little bit more of actually housing plants versus just sculpting them, which has been a very interesting kind of mindset to put myself in. But it's basically just out of a need. And I don't know that I would have gotten there had it not been for us being kind of empty campus right now, and going home and just kind of sitting around a bunch of plants on my balcony as we social distance. So for me, I think that's how my practice has changed a little bit during at least COVID, with closures. But I think as far as the slump and having these kind of waves, as Nick mentioned, you know, I've always seen whether or not I'm making as still creative times. I don't think that's been ever an issue for me to not physically be making.
and I'll just weigh in with my thoughts, and that is I discovered in myself, my favorite joke about myself is I'm a bad artist because I don't have Kelly's drive. I don't go home and take care of a child and have a family life, and then everyone's asleep and I've only gotten 5 hours of sleep, but I'm still going to stay up for an hour and make artwork. Like I that's never been me. and I've always felt like, oh, shit, I'm a bad artist. But when I discovered arts administration, it lit something up inside me. So what I do here feels like my creative outlet. I had a great conversation with Josh Kopis, who's a potter in Murphy, which is a city really close to Asheville in North Carolina, last summer. And he's been refurbishing the old county jailhouse and creating a new space with it. And we were just having this great conversation about how that is his art right now, and I feel like Arrowmont is my art right now. But what I realized about myself is I don't have the daily practice. I'm not someone who goes to the studio every day. It doesn't matter how much I pay for it. It doesn't matter how beautiful it is. That doesn't motivate me. My tendency is to need outside accountability for things that I want to do for myself. And so I actually come to life in a residency experience. Graduate school, I was prolific, amazingly prolific for 2.5 years, but it was because it was like a long residency. I realize now, I can make more work in 1 month at the Vermont Studio Center than in a year at home with a home studio. So this is not me plugging Arrowmont, because what we do is short-term residency workshops, but although it is, which you should all save up money and sign up next year. But what I'm saying is that I've recognized that what I thought of as slumps are not slumps. They're time, like Nick was saying, that I absorb and I think about, or like Rebecca was saying, I follow on. These conversations actually inspire me the most. What we've started to do, these roundtable discussions, I have to personally say have been really meaningful. And that's what I miss so much about having you guys here on campus, is having these conversations. That does inspire me. And then when I actually make the work is when I have some dedicated time and space that feels like a residency. So I encourage you to have that experience for yourself with us at Arrowmont. And I encourage you to reach out to us. And I thank you guys all so much. Thank you, Rebecca and Nick and Kelly, for putting yourself in the spotlight, which isn't always your favorite, but you've said wonderful things, and I really appreciate your insights. And everyone who's joined us, thank you so much for staying a part of this community and staying a part of our lives, because it's important. It matters. And we will look forward to hearing from you. Let us know how you're doing, and we will let you know how we're doing, and we will talk to you very soon. So have a wonderful rest of the day and the rest of the week. Thank you.